Backpacks are a great addition to any VR player. They provide an excellent and somewhat realistic way of allowing the player to carry additional items on them, whether it be additional weapons, tools, supplies, or even things that might be critical later on down the line in a game, such as keys or cards. All of this stuff can be very useful to the player and can be an excellent addition to the player's experience. So in this tutorial, I'm going to show you how to set up a very simple backpack that can be used in order to add additional inventory components or anything else, whether it be menus or so on and so forth. But before we go ahead and jump into that, if you enjoy this video and want to see even more just like this one, be sure to hit the like and subscribe button down below. And with that, let's jump right into the video. Before we begin, I highly suggest that you guys go and check out the inventory component tutorial I did a while back. I'll have a link to it somewhere up here. The only reason I suggest that you go and check it out, while it's not completely necessary, I will be using the inventory component and inventory cube in order to show some possible ways that you may use this backpack. So the backpack will be designed with this inventory component in mind, and we will be attaching it to the backpack as well. I've also brought in the grab interface from that same tutorial. I'll be showing you that because it will be necessary for the backpack, and we'll need to make a couple modifications to this grab interface as well. And I did not carry over any changes to the VR pawn from that tutorial, since we will need to again make some changes to our grab left and our grab right from that tutorial. We'll also be adding in a little bit of blueprint up here to the begin play as well. So I did not carry over any changes to the VR pawn either. It's just our inventory component, cube, and interface. So with that out of the way, let's go and start by opening up our interface, since we will need to make an additional function here. So as you can see, as of right now, we have two functions, grab and release. Both of these will be necessary for the backpack. And each of these does have a motion controller input. Again, this will be necessary for the backpack. I am then also going to add in a third function here called active, and I'm going to, not input, on the output, I'm going to add in a Boolean output, and I'm just going to call this is active. Ooh, there we go. Now, depending on your use case for the backpack for this grab function, you may find it easier to add in the active function into a second and different interface, or just attach it to the backpack itself. And the only reason for that is everything that uses grab may not need this active function. So that's entirely up to you. I'll talk about this a little bit more as well once we get to the player. So just keep that in mind. You may want to add that into a second function if you would like. Now that we've finished making all the changes that we need to our grab interface, now let's go and move on to our blueprints, or our blueprints folder. So I'm going to start by creating a new blueprint class called actor, and I'm just going to call this backpack. Let's go and open that up. And in here, let's start with our components. So I'm going to start by creating a mesh that we can use. For this example, I'm going to use a plane. Since I just want something small, something that's easy to use, this is just what I'm going to use. You don't have to use a plane. This can be any stack mesh. Maybe you have an actual backpack mesh. Maybe you want to use a cube, a cone, cylinder, whatever it is that you want to use, you can use it. Now I'm going to go and first leave it called plane, but I want to leave this attached to our scene root. I don't want to make the plane the scene root. And the reason for this is if we go and grab our plane here, so first I need to make a couple rotations here. This is for the plane if you're using this. There we go. Now, for this, the reason I left the default scene root as our default scene root is because we're going to be attaching this actor to our hand. So we normally aren't going to want our hand grabbing right in the center of our backpack or whatever it is that you're using. So I'm going to go and take our stack mesh and move this down so that way our default scene root is roughly at the top of where our plane is. Just kind of keeps everything much simpler. We'll scale this down in a second. We'll need to make a couple other modifications to this plane as well. Now, attached to the plane, you're going to want to add any content that you want. For this example, I'm going to be adding in the inventory component. And let me go ahead and set a couple stack meshes for this. Sphere, arcade editor sphere. We'll give it a disk, material, and I'll go and scale this down so that way it's visible. There we go. Let me go and position a couple. Let me go and position a couple of these around. So we're going to take a couple of those. And let me just take a second here to position these all around. All right, so this is how I decide to lay out my inventory components. You can do something different. Of course, you may have some different content. I do highly suggest that whatever content that you are going to add onto your backpack, you do attach it to the stack mesh, and I'll show you why in a second. But the last thing that we're going to add on here to our component is going to be a box collision. And I'm going to, before I actually reposition this around, actually no, I'll go and position this real quick. We'll go and set this -25. I'll show you why -25 in a second. And that was the wrong one. And I want to set this box extent to 50 in all directions. Now, the reason for this scale for our box extent is this backpack is going to go behind our head. This will allow for us to grab onto the backpack over the shoulder and be able to drag it forward, so that way we can access our inventory, our menus, whatever it is that we may have on our backpack. Now, the reason I set it so big is since this is going to go behind the head, it's going to be in a place we can't really see. We want to make sure we have a nice large collision that we can use and that we can easily grab since we can't see it. Now, you may find that a different size collision may work, maybe a different shape collision may work better for you. All of that is entirely up to you. You don't have to use this box collision, but whatever collision you do use, you want to make sure that's pretty large. You can even use the stack mesh collision. I wouldn't normally suggest it just because typically our stack mesh isn't big enough to use as our main collision. So whatever collision you want to use, that's entirely up to you. Now, let's go and do a couple modifications here to our plane. I'm going to start by scaling down our plane here because this is a bit big, so I'm going to scale it down a bit. It doesn't probably appear very big here, but trust me, that was definitely pretty big for what we needed. And then coming down here, I also want to set it so that way cast shadow on our plane is set to false. And the reason for this is we're going to start off by setting our backpack to have no shadows, and it's going to be hidden so it can't appear in any reflections or anything. This just kind of helps make the experience a little bit better. So I personally like making sure that there's no shadow, that it's hidden, that everything is good there. And then finally, before we move on to our construction script and our event graph, in our class settings, I'm going to go ahead and add that grab interface into implemented interfaces. Now, we can go and move on to our construction script. Our construction script is going to be pretty simple. I'm just going to grab our plane, and I'm just going to set hidden in game, set that as the first execution, and I'm set new hidden to true, and I'll go and propagate that to children, and it'll make sure that all of our inventory components are also hidden as well. And that's all that we need to do for the construction script. So we can now move on to our event graph. In the event graph, I'm just going to get rid of all those. We're not going to use begin play, begin overlap, tick. None of that's going to be useful to us. So I'm just going to go and create our interfaces. I'll create active. That's going to be pretty simple, but I'll save that till the end. Grab and release. And there we go. So let me go move this up a bit. Starting off with our grab here, we're going to do a couple of things. So I'm going to start by taking our motion controller. I'm going to promote that to a variable. That's going to be, we're just going to leave that called motion controller. It's nice, it's easily descriptive. So I'm just going to leave it called as a motion controller. Then we're going to attach actor to component. This is going to actually attach it to our hand. So I'm just going to take our motion controller and set that as our parent. Our location and rotation will both snap to target, and our scale rule will keep to world. Then, moving on from this, I'm going to take our plane. I'm going to set this to hidden in game. There we go, just like that. I'll set new hidden, or I'll leave new hidden to false and set propagate to children to true. And then finally, I'll go and take our plane and I will set cast shadow. There we go. And set that to true. Then the last thing that we need to do here is I'm going to create a Boolean here, and I'm just going to call this active, or here, we'll call it activated. There we go. And we're going to set activated to true. So now that our grab is all done, now we can move on to our release. Our release is going to be somewhat the same as what you see here. We're going to be making a few changes, of course. So starting down here, we're going to, in our event release, we're going to check to see if this motion controller that we're getting through release is equal to the motion controller that we have stored here in our backpack. So I'm going to go and feed that through branch. And what this does is it very simply just checks to make sure that the correct hand is triggering the release, that we don't have the right hand is holding the backpack, but our left hand happens to trigger the release because it was held first, or vice versa. So it's just a nice simple check to make sure that the correct hand is releasing. Assuming that it is in fact the same motion controller, we're first off going to set our motion controller back to null. Then I want to create a new variable here. This is just going to be called default component. And I'm going to set this to a scene component. Now what this is going to be, like I said, I want this backpack to be attached behind our head. So this component we're going to set up in our player. And this component here is going to be where we attach to when our backpack is not being held. So we're going to take our default component. I'm going to right click to convert it to validated get. And assuming that this is valid, we're going to attach actor to component. Only this time we're going to first set that this could go out to is valid. Our default component is going to go in as the parent. And our location is going to snap to target, our rotation is going to snap to target, and our scale is going to keep world. Then finally, I'm just going to copy this up here from our grab, this set hidden in game, set cast shadow activated. And I'm just going to bring this down just to keep things simple. I missed there. There we go. Of course, we want to invert these checkboxes. So new hidden is now set to true. New cast shadow is set to false, and activated is set back to false. Now, finally, we just need to deal with active. This is very simple. All we're going to do is take activated, and that's just going to go into our return. That's all that we need to do there. And that's all that we need to do for our whole backpack. So I'm going to close out of this, and if you don't have it open already, make sure you open up your VR pawn. It'll be under VR template blueprints, and there's your VR pawn. But now we can move on to our VR pawn. I'm going to start up here with begin play. Now before we can begin here in the begin play, we actually first need to jump into our viewport. And this was something I did almost forget, is here in our viewport, we want to take our camera and add on a scene component. I'm just going to call this backpack component. Now, this can really be attached wherever you want. I like to have this attached to the camera right behind, since because of how big our collision is for our backpack, and so long as we don't push it too far behind our camera, this just gives us a really nice and simple setup, so that way you can just reach behind over shoulder and grab onto our backpack without needing to worry too much. Now, of course, you can attach this to other places. This doesn't have to be attached to the camera. This could be attached to a motion controller. You could have some kind of setup so that way you actually have like a back. Maybe you have like a full body tracking so you know where the back of your avatar is. You can put it there. So you can put it wherever you want. I just like putting it right here behind the head. I think it's nice and easy. Then jumping into our event graph now that we have our backpack component. We're going to start by spawning an actor from class. And just so you're aware, this is at the end of begin play. So starting out here, we're going to spawn an actor. The class we're going to pass through is going to be our backpack that we created. And then the only other thing we need to worry about here is our spawn transform. You can set this to whatever you want. We're actually going to end up attaching this right now to the backpack component right after it spawns. So it really does not matter where it spawns. It's always going to be attached back here. So if you guys don't want to like actually input any sort of transform, you can right click and just split struct pin. and that'll work just fine. If you decide to leave it as is, so recombine like that, you'll actually see you'll get an error. If you split it and compile, that error goes away. So I personally just prefer to take that simple route. So now that we have our backpack, we're going to need to do two things. So first, didn't mean to grab that whole thing. I'm going to set default component. That was the component that we set that we're going to attach to on release. Then our default component is going to be the backpack component we just made. There we go. And I'm just going to bring that down because we will need a second reference to this. There we go. I'm going to bring that down just a tad there. All right, and with that, now we can take our backpack and we're going to attach actor to component. The component we're going to, of course, attach to is going to be this default component. So that can just go into parent. You can also grab backpack component if you'd like. Location, we're going to snap to target. Rotation will snap to target, and scale will keep as world. And that's all that we need to do here for bringing in our backpack. This will spawn in our backpack when we start, and we won't have to do anything. Now we can go ahead and move on to our grab left and our grab right. Now, if you did follow along with the inventory component, do not skip through this part. A lot of this will be the same as what you did to the VR pawn there. However, we will be making a single change for this grab left and grab right. So do not skip through this if you are planning to use the inventory component tutorial and you're continuing off of that. So now that we're here, now working on our grab left and grab right, let's go and get started here. So, like I said, a lot of this is going to be very similar to what you may have seen if you've watched any of my previous tutorials where I've done grabbing and releasing. So I'm going to start by in pressed. I'm going to overlap actors, and this has to be a sphere. There it is, sphere overlap actors. Pressed. The sphere position I'm going to take is going to be the motion controller left, and that's because we're using grab left. So I'm going to get the world location of our motion controller. There we go. And that world location is going into sphere position. For sphere radius, I like 20. I think it works pretty well. Object type, I'm going to go ahead and make an array here. And for our backpack, we need to make sure that this is world dynamic. Then from our out actors, I'm going to for each loop with a break, just like that. Then here in our array element, we first want to make sure that our array element has the grab interface. So we want to check to see if it does implement interface. The interface is going to be grab, and that's going to be passed through branch. Now this is where you're going to have the change if you decide to follow through with the inventory component. So here at this point, we want to take our array element. I'm going to reroute this real quick. Ooh. I'm going to reroute that a couple times. There we go. Here at this point, we want to check to make sure that it is not activated. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to run active. You can see that that's the active message from our grab. So I'm going to run that. And then this is going to run through a branch. Now, because we're using this active, you may find that it's better not to add active to grab. Maybe you want to only have certain things be active. By default, this active will actually return false. So if you have certain objects that aren't going to be using active, it's good to set your default as false. So just kind of keep that in mind. Now, assuming that this is false, we're going to take this, actor that we're getting here in array element, and I'm just going to set this to, first I got to promote to variable. There we go. Oh, that was my bad. That had to be on false, not true. Make sure it's on false, not true, for this example. Now in here, I'm going to set this to grab left actor, and then we're just going to set this to grab message. And we do also need to pass through motion controller. Do not forget that. Motion controller left is going right in there. And then I'm just going to take this grab, feed it around. That's going to go into our break. that will break out of this loop, so that way we're not going to check for other actors. We cannot possibly grab other actors during this point. Finally, for our released, we're just going to take our grab left actor, and I'm just going to set this to convert to validated get. And then on released, if this is valid, we're going to trigger our release message, again passing through our motion controller left. And then we'll just go ahead and set our grab left actor back to null. So now I'm going to go and copy all this, and we're going to take this, we're going to make a few changes for our grab right, since we do need to change some of these references for our grab right. I'm going to just delete all this, since almost all that is for the left hand specifically. So going left to right, we're going to take our motion controller left and pass it our motion controller right. Moving forward, we only need to make changes down here at the end. So let me go ahead and take these, and I'll go and promote this to variable. There we go, false, pass that through, that goes through there. And I'll go and set motion controller right as that variable name. What? Oh, I set to the wrong thing. Grab right actor, that was my bad. Grab right actor, and then motion controller right is just going in here. Then again, we just need to repeat up here for our release. So I'm just going to take our grab right actor, promote or convert that to validated get. Then we'll just go and trigger release once again, and pass through our motion controller right, and set our grab right actor back to null. And that's all that we need to do there for our backpack. So now our backpack is all set up, we're all good to go. Since I have those inventory components, I'm also going to go ahead, before we jump into VR, I'm going to take our inventory cube, and I'm just going to bring this in. So let me go and scale this down, because that needs scaling down. Maybe 0.25. And I'll create a couple of them here. So let's go and create a couple here. 2, 4. I think 4 is pretty good. What do you guys think? I think that's pretty good. So I'll go and jump into VR, and we can go ahead and see how this backpack looks. So here we are. So as you can see, I have the inventory cubes here. I can of course grab and move them around. That's not what we're here for though. We're here to see the backpack. So first off, you can see here's my shadow. You don't see any shadow from the backpack. There's absolutely nothing there. Try and get that out of the way so that way you guys can see it's not like hiding or something. So you guys can see there's no backpack shadow. So if I go ahead, reach behind me, grab and pull forward, you can see I now have the backpack itself. You can actually see too that these these little spheres don't generate any shadows to begin with. So that's part of why I didn't remove the shadows from those. But you can see that the main stack mesh part of the backpack goes, and when I release it, it goes back. So I can go and grab it, bring it forward, and if I want, I can attach on some components. There we go. I can also go and pull them right back off, and I can attach them wherever I want. And I can go and release, and you can see it doesn't show up. We don't see the shadows from the cubes or anything. There's no visible way we should be able to see that backpack. And then we can of course bring it forward, and we can still grab those components right back, or those actors right back off. Now, as I mentioned when we were creating this backpack, you may decide to use a different shape for your collision. You may choose to scale it down or scale it up, depending on you. One of the bugs with this setup is I did make the collision a bit too big, so I can actually grab it from my face just like that. I think it's just in front of my face though, so I have to bring my hand a little bit close. But you can see if you want to, you can of course take the scale of that collision, scale it down. You can even kind of orient it into a different shape, so that way it covers behind the head in a different way. You can see I can grab over the shoulder though, and it works just fine. And that's for either hand. So there. So like I can do that, and then pass it over to my right hand. So yeah, so that is our backpack with a couple of inventory components on it. So you can see that we have a nice and simple backpack there. So yeah. And with that, that's how we set up a very simple backpack with an inventory component system. So that way players can carry around even more with them when they're journeying around in your virtual world. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, be sure to hit the like and subscribe button down below. I also want to give a quick shout out to my Patreon supporters who you should see over here on the right hand side. And with that, I'll see you in the next reality.